Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the first ever Quad Leadership Summit that took place yesterday virtually. See, over the last few weeks, we have been analyzing the quadrilateral grouping repeatedly, and we have understood the background to it in detail. Back in 2007, when Japan proposed the idea of the quadrilateral, what brought the four countries together was their shared commitment for democratic values. The Quad countries, that is India, US, Australia, and Japan, have a joint vision of promoting a free and open Indo Pacific, and they want to ensure that the Indo Pacific region is inclusive, secure, and prosperous. Their joint vision for the Indo Pacific has always been driven by China's questionable activities in the Indo Pacific. See, after Japan proposed the idea of the quadrilateral back in 2007, the idea did receive some initial backing by the other countries, but it was not taken up seriously by the members until 2017. It was during this period, that is between 2007 and 2017, that China started stepping up its military aggression with regard to maritime disputes in the Indo Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. Along with its military aggression, China even started showing diplomatic aggression by openly breaching international law and rules, such as the provisions of the UN clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea with regard to settling maritime disputes. These expansionist tendencies of China finally brought these four countries together under the Quad grouping. But from 2017 until now, its interaction was just limited to government interaction involving senior ministers and respective secretaries of the four countries. But now, the Quad grouping has been elevated to summit level interaction, and for the first time ever, the four leaders of India, US, Australia, and Japan have interacted, thus making it a landmark event for the quadrilateral grouping and as well as for the Indo Pacific region. During this virtual summit level interaction between the four leaders, the Quad countries have reiterated their commitment to uphold international law, especially in the Indo Pacific, and enforce a rules based order in order to ensure that the Indo Pacific region is free and open. Because China, through its military and diplomatic aggression, has repeatedly violated the international law and rules, and it has even disrupted freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in the Indo Pacific. That's the reason why the Quad leaders have reiterated their commitment to maintain the Indo Pacific free and open and ensure that it is inclusive, open for all the countries, and secure and prosperous. But this stand taken by the Quad countries is seen by China as the formation of an anti-China military and diplomatic alliance. Because even though the Quad grouping is strictly a diplomatic grouping as of now, the four Quad countries share very close defense and strategic relations, and they even take part in many joint military exercises, such as the Malabar Naval Exercise. So this has led China to perceive the Quad as a military alliance targeted against it, and thereby China has expressed its opposition to the formation of the Quad alliance. But to address this allegation from China, the Quad countries have said that the Quad grouping does not stand against anything, or they do not stand against any particular country. Instead, they're actually standing for something, that is for values and international laws and rules, thus making the Quad a value-based grouping and not a military grouping targeted against any particular country. This can also be seen from the fact that the Quad has been diversifying into other domains, despite its exclusive focus on the Indo-Pacific region. During the latest summit level interaction, the Quad countries have agreed to set up different working groups for different domains, and this includes a vaccine expert group to promote the equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines around the world, especially to poor and underdeveloped countries, in order to jointly combat the pandemic. They have even set up a working group for critical and emerging technologies and as well as for climate change to deal with climate-related technology, that is renewable and clean forms of technology, and they have committed to pool their resources together to arrange for climate finance and to build the capacity of countries in the Indo-Pacific to jointly combat climate change as well. So what we are seeing over here is essentially a diversification of the Quad into several other domains, while retaining its primary focus on the Indo Pacific in order to ensure that international law and rules are enforced in the region. The same argument has been made about the intentions and the objectives of the Quad by the US National Security Advisor as well, and this has been covered in this article in page number 13. The National Security Advisor of the United States has stated that China is not the only focus of the quadrilateral. Yes, China-related issues were discussed at the Quad meeting, but China is not the sole focus of this grouping. See, naturally, China-related matters were expected to come up for discussion at the Quad because of its repeated aggression against all the member countries. For example, Australia has been repeatedly facing coercion from China in the domain of trade. Then Japan has been facing a maritime dispute with China over the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea. And India has been facing unnecessary Chinese aggression at the border areas, especially along the line of actual control. Then, of course, the United States has been locked in a Cold War with China, stretching across multiple domains, including diplomacy, military, and even including technology and trade. So obviously, these China-related matters have been discussed by the Quad members during the summit-level interaction, but it has been made very clear that China is not the only focus of this grouping. Because several strategic experts and commentators in the media, they have been often referring to the Quad as a military alliance and as the Asian version of the NATO. The NSA of the United States has made it clear that the Quad is not essentially a military alliance. It's not a Asian NATO. It is not entirely targeted against a particular country. But of course, matters related to it come up for discussion because in the Indo Pacific region, China's aggression has been affecting all the members. And it's not just China's external aggression that bothers the Quad members, but even its internal aggression has been affecting the interests of the Quad countries. For example, internally, China's controversial policies related to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan has raised concerns amongst the Quad members, especially amongst US, Japan, and Australia. Then its external aggression in the South and East China Sea and with India along the LAC has led to increasing concerns about China's aggression, and naturally all these matters have been discussed by the Quad members. But this doesn't make the Quad grouping a China-centric grouping according to the NSA of the United States. Apart from this, the Quad leaders have also discussed recent cybersecurity related incidents, most of which were of Chinese origin. Be it the recent cybersecurity incidents in the United States involving Microsoft and SolarWinds, or be it the reported cyber attack against Indian power grids and port facilities as reported in Western media, or the similar cyber attacks faced by Japan and Australia. All these cybersecurity related incidents have been believed to be of Chinese origin, and the Quad members have discussed these issues from a cybersecurity perspective. Then even with regard to critical and emerging technologies such as 5G networks, serious security concerns have been raised about the involvement of Chinese company Huawei as far as its telecom switching equipment is concerned. Because see, Huawei Networks has a global dominance in the field of mobile communication and internet connectivity, and its telecom equipment forms the backbone of the global 2G, 3G, and 4G networks. But Western countries led by the US have always expressed a fear that Chinese companies such as Huawei are closely connected to Chinese security and intelligence agencies, and they might be installing backdoors in their equipment, which becomes a cybersecurity vulnerability for these countries. So now, with the upcoming rollout of 5G networks around the world, the United States has taken the lead to boycott Huawei, and under the previous Trump administration, it even carried out a global campaign with close friends and allies to impose a similar boycott on Huawei and keep it out of their 5G networks. Of late, it has been reported in the media that even India is considering to keep Huawei out of its 5G networks. But however, the Biden administration is currently not enforcing this on other countries, and hence it's going to be India's sovereign decision to decide on the involvement of Chinese companies in its critical infrastructure. So in conclusion, it's very clear that the quadrilateral grouping has emerged as a part of the critical architecture of the Indo Pacific region. And as a result of the national interests of the member countries in this region, they are going to keep an eye on China's activities in the region. However, this does not make the Quad an anti-China alliance or a military alliance, because as discussed, the quadrilateral has been diversifying into many other domains as well. It's looking at economics, trade, technology, climate change, and even pandemic and the vaccine is a focus for the quadrilateral as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. But however, China refuses to buy this argument of the Quad members, and its position on the Quad becomes very clear when you look at its statements, which has been covered in this article on page number 9. Following the Quad Leadership Summit, China has responded and it has said that mutual cooperation between countries shouldn't result in the targeting of any third party, and it shouldn't result in the formation of exclusive clubs or exclusive blocs. China has said that any exchanges or cooperation between a group of countries should be built on mutual trust and for the mutual benefit of the world. And it has called upon the Quad members to not look at geopolitics as a zero-sum game, and it has asked them to give up their Cold War mindset. So this reaction from China makes it clear that the Chinese government views the Quad as an anti-China alliance that is being formed at the behest of the United States in order to exclusively target Chinese interests in the Indo-Pacific. However, Chinese media and Chinese experts are of the opinion that the Quad grouping is still in a very nascent stage, and it is unlikely to ever pose a military threat to China because the members of the Quad are heavily dependent on China, and individually, the Quad members would any day would desire to have closer relations with China as it would serve their larger national interests. This is true to an extent as well, because countries like India, Australia, Japan, they do have a lot of dependency on China, and even the United States for that matter has a lot of dependency on China. Especially in the economic domain, these countries do have an excessive dependency on China, and individually they would like to have good relations with China. That's one reason why India has always strongly resisted the transformation of the quadrilateral into a military alliance. But in general, Chinese strategic experts and the Chinese government is looking at the quadrilateral as an anti-China grouping. But in conclusion, we can say that the quadrilateral grouping was born because of China's controversial activities in the Indo-Pacific region. There is no denying this. But however, today the Quad is diversifying into several other domains as well concerning the Indo-Pacific. And as stated by the Quad members, its sole focus is not just China. Yes, China-related matters will be the priority for the Quad countries, but at the same time, they are trying to diversify into several other areas as well, including trade and economy, technology and cybersecurity, disaster management and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, along with the underlying objective of maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6 that deals with the future of Afghanistan. Now in the last few days, we have been repeatedly covering this topic as there are several important developments taking place which will have a direct bearing on the future of Afghanistan and as well as on Indian interests in Afghanistan. The other day we had discussed the renewed strategy of the United States towards Afghanistan under the new Biden administration. Recently, the Biden administration has carried out a thorough review of the 2020 peace deal that was signed between the then Trump administration and the Taliban. Under this peace deal, the United States had committed to pull out all its troops by the 1st of May 2021. And in return, the Taliban had committed to ensure that Afghan soil is not used for terrorism, particularly against the Western countries. But this deal was not an inclusive deal that met the interests of the regional countries in and around Afghanistan. And more importantly, it even failed to protect Afghanistan's core interests. Because this was an exclusive deal that was struck by the Trump administration between the United States and the Taliban, and even the Afghan elected government was excluded from it. When the Doha negotiations were taking place, the Afghan government was never consulted by the US, and all the regional powers, especially India, had been kept out of these talks. The Trump administration even failed to obtain sufficient guarantees from the Taliban with regard to its engagement in religious fundamentalism, extremism, and terrorism. Because even after the deal was struck, the Taliban kept on carrying out attacks in Afghanistan, especially against the Afghan government, religious minorities, and the Taliban has been able to do this unhindered because today the Taliban largely controls vast territories in Afghanistan. As a part of the peace deal, the US even put pressure on the Afghan government to release several Taliban prisoners, and in return, it didn't even get the Taliban to commit to a ceasefire. Then, under the peace deal, intra Afghan talks were proposed, but these talks haven't really moved forward. And these intra Afghan talks involving the Taliban and the other political stakeholders were supposed to determine the future of Afghanistan, especially its constitutional and governance framework. But the Taliban is not really interested in these talks because it knows that it clearly holds the edge in Afghanistan and the balance of power is clearly in Taliban's favor as it is in control of large territories in Afghanistan. So the Taliban is just waiting out for the American troops to pull out. And once that happens, the Taliban will stop holding any consultations with the political leaders of the Afghan government. And simply through the use of force, it's likely to capture power again in the country and return Afghanistan to a conservative state where religious fundamentalism is promoted and religious minorities are targeted with the strict enforcement of the Sharia law. The Taliban has even declared that if the US fails to pull out all its troops by the deadline, then it's going to step up its insurgent attacks against the foreign troops. And in any possible scenario, this appears to be a very bad deal for Afghanistan and as well as for all the countries in the region. Hence, the new Biden administration in the US has reviewed the peace deal and it has been making a few new attempts in order to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't again fall entirely into the hands of the Taliban. See, it's not possible for the Biden administration as well to continue retaining American troops in Afghanistan because this has not only been the longest conflict for the United States, but also its troops will definitely come under attack from the Taliban if they continue to remain deployed beyond the deadline. So the Biden administration is looking to preserve some aspects of the peace deal while trying to adopt a new approach in order to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't again become a stronghold of the Taliban. Hence, the Biden administration has proposed 3 new steps. 1. It has proposed the formation of a unity government in Afghanistan involving members of the Taliban along with elected political leaders in order to ensure that Afghanistan at least remains a partial democracy. Then parallelly, the Biden administration has been promoting the greater involvement of regional powers, and for this, it has suggested 2 new platforms. 1. The US has proposed the direct involvement of Turkey to open mediation and talks with the Taliban, and parallelly, it has proposed a mediation process under the UN involving major regional powers such as India, Pakistan, Russia, China, Iran, and of course the United States. So this approach of the Biden administration gives India for the first time a direct role in influencing the political future of Afghanistan. But however, it's still not clear as to what extent India can influence the ongoing peace process in Afghanistan. But however, this is definitely an opportunity for India to protect its core interests in Afghanistan, especially with regard to the threats posed by Pakistan and its connections with the Taliban and the other terror outfits that are operating on Afghan soil. But this proposed solution from the Biden administration presents 2 bad options for Afghanistan's politics, especially to its elected leaders and to those who believe in democracy in Afghanistan. Be it the people of Afghanistan or be it the elected representatives and the political parties, they are all left with 2 bad options. Either they have to agree to share power with the Taliban and eventually modify the constitution, which could result in them losing their democratic and liberal rights, or refusing any such deal will result in a full blown out war where the Taliban is most likely to completely capture power by toppling the Afghan civilian government. And this would not be in the interest of any country, maybe apart from Pakistan. Because then Pakistan could continue cultivating the Taliban and enhance its strategic depth in Afghanistan in order to wage its covert proxy war against India. because Pakistan is known to use Afghan soil to nurture several anti-India terror outfits. And this remains India's biggest security concern as far as the future of Afghanistan is concerned. On the other hand, the Afghan leaders are left with two bad options to choose from. And hence, it's very important for us to track these ongoing developments as they could be very important for the mains examination, especially the impact on Indian interests. Then, in a related article on page number 13, it has been reported that even Russia has formally extended support to the inclusion of Taliban in an interim unity government as proposed by the United States. So, this makes it clear that global powers are pushing towards a transition interim government which will include members of the Taliban, because this seems to be the only option available as of now to prevent the worst case scenario. As discussed, the Taliban has been resurgent and it has made a lot of territorial gains in the last few years. And if the US were to suddenly withdraw its troops as per the May 1st deadline, then in all likelihood, the Taliban would unleash a spring offensive to topple the Afghan civilian government and to completely capture power in the country. Such a scenario is not in the interest of any stakeholder, especially the Afghan government and the Afghan leaders. And hence global powers such as US and even Russia, they're looking to work out an interim agreement which will allow the Taliban to become a part of the formal government in order to help in ensuring regional stability and to prevent the Taliban from again pushing the country into civil war. So these ongoing rapid developments make it all the more important for India to start engaging the Taliban directly, which it has always hesitated to do because it brands the Taliban as a terrorist outfit that is working at the behest of Pakistan. This approach of India is becoming highly untenable because all the major powers have come to accept the Taliban as a legitimate political entity in Afghanistan, and they are looking to help in the formation of an interim unity government that will include members of the Taliban. So if such a government were to materialize in Afghanistan, then India would be losing out because of its lack of connections with the Taliban. Major powers such as Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, and even several European countries, they have come to engage directly with the Taliban, just like the United States has been doing all these years. And this rapidly changing geopolitics of Afghanistan presents a tough diplomatic challenge for India. Now let's take up another column from page number 6, in which the writer explains how Asian economies such as India and South Korea are all set to play an increasingly important geopolitical role in West Asia because these Asian economies are largely oil importers which are dependent on West Asian oil. And in the interest of protecting their energy security, they would be forced to play a greater role in the security and geopolitics of West Asia. Because this increasing energy security interest of these Asian economies in West Asia is marked by the declining dependency on West Asian oil for the Western countries, particularly the United States. See, in all these years, the United States had provided a security blanket for the whole West Asia region, and it was playing a direct role in the geopolitics of the region because the American economy and the Western countries at large were heavily dependent on West Asian oil for their energy security. This led the Western countries, particularly the US, to play a direct role in all the geopolitical issues of West Asia, despite how complex the security situation is in the West Asia region. But this age-old dynamic is undergoing a change, and the dependency on West Asian oil for the Western countries and the US is declining, marked by a rapid increase in dependency for Asian economies such as India and South Korea on West Asian oil. Along with this, the recent signing of the Abraham Accords between Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain under the mediation of the then Trump administration has led to a complete realignment in the relations between Israel and the Arab world. And through the Abraham Accords, UAE and Bahrain recognize Israel and they have set up diplomatic ties with Israel. So this marks the normalization of ties between Israel and the Arab countries, which earlier had been disrupted because of the Palestinian issue. But now, the changing geopolitics of the region has brought US, Israel, and the Arab world led by Saudi Arabia together, And these three power blocs, represented by US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, have come together to jointly target the rising Iranian influence in the region, especially considering Iranian role in the Syrian civil war and the civil war in Yemen, and as well as concerns over its nuclear weapons program. US and Israel had come together, along with the support of the Arab countries led by the Sunni power bloc, represented by countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So all these countries have united to jointly counter Iran in the region. And parallelly, the American dependency on West Asian oil has gone down. And recently, in January 2021, the US did not even import oil from Saudi Arabia. And this is the first time that it has happened since 1985. So gradually, the American dependency on West Asian oil has gone down because of its own shale gas reserves. And at the same time, the ongoing realignment in the regional geopolitics has started reducing the security role of the United States in the West Asia region. But on the other hand, Asian economies such as India and South Korea, which are growing at a rapid pace, they have increased their oil import dependency from the West Asian countries. And the security concerns and geopolitics of the region is going to threaten their energy security and their energy supplies. And hence, this is going to push up the security involvement of Asian countries like India and South Korea in the West Asia region. In fact, the Asian oil importers such as India and South Korea, they have even proposed the establishment of an importers OPEC in order to protect their economic interests and their energy security, which is often threatened by the producers OPEC, because the West Asian oil producing nations, they get to determine oil supplies and oil prices. And these oil producing countries that are part of the OPEC and the OPEC Plus, they often operate like a cartel, which ends up threatening the economic and energy interests of the importing countries like India and South Korea. So there is a proposal to create an importers OPEC so that the importing countries can come together to protect their interests. And this again highlights the increasing role of the Asian economies in defining the security and geopolitics of West Asia. See, this analysis is being brought out by the writer in the context of the Desert Flag military exercise that is being hosted by the United Arab Emirates. Desert Flag is basically an Air Force exercise that is hosted by the UAE, and currently it's in its 6th edition, and the UAE has invited many other countries to participate such as India, Bahrain, France, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and the United States. So the participation of the Indian Air Force and the South Korean Air Force in the Desert Flag Air Force exercise will provide these Asian economies greater insight into the security situation and geopolitics of the complex West Asia region. Because as far as their energy security in the region is concerned, both have faced similar challenges, especially with regard to the tensions between United States and Iran. See, back in 2009-2010, the United States had targeted Iran's nuclear weapons program by imposing economic sanctions against Iran. This was affecting the import of oil from Iran, and India was one of the largest importers of Iranian oil. So because of these American sanctions, India was facing certain difficulties in paying for the Iranian oil, and certain payments were held up. So then, an interesting development took place in 2013. An Indian oil tanker that was transporting oil near the Strait of Hormuz was captured by the Iranian forces, and it was taken to the port of Bandar Abbas. Iran stated that it had confiscated the Indian oil tanker because the ship had violated environmental norms, but this was largely seen as a pressure tactic by Iran in order to force India to pay up and clear the pending dues that India owed towards Iran for importing oil from the country. So the tensions between US and Iran and the imposition of American sanctions against Iran was disrupting India's import of oil from Iran in many different ways. Fortunately, in 2015, the Iranian nuclear deal was signed, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But very soon the deal broke apart because in 2018, the United States under President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA, and the Trump administration went on to reimpose economic sanctions against Iran. As a result of the new sanctions regime, now South Korea has faced a similar challenge And earlier this year, in January, a South Korean oil tanker has been confiscated by the Iranian authorities on similar environmental grounds. And it again comes at a time when South Korea owes some payments to Iran, and it has not been able to process these payments because of the current sanctions that the US has imposed against Iran. So, in many ways, these two incidents are quite similar, and they highlight the similar threat that India and South Korea face as far as their energy security is concerned. So, the rising threat to their energy security in the West Asia region and the declining role and influence of the Western countries and the US in the region is pushing the Asian economies to play a greater role in ensuring the security of the West Asia region and also to play a direct role in its geopolitics. So India has not only stepped up its defense relations with the UAE, but also with Saudi Arabia, and it was all set to conduct its first ever naval exercise with Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately, this planned naval exercise had to be postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Indian Navy in particular has stepped up its operational reach in the West Asia region, and over the last few years, it has carried out several port calls, and it has even gained access to the port of Duqm of Oman for logistical support because it has become critical for India to ensure the security of the sea lanes of communication in the Persian Gulf. So in the coming years, Asian oil importers such as India and South Korea will be expected to play a greater security role in and around the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, and as well as around the Red Sea. So all these developments leads the writer to conclude that the Asian security footprint is going to grow in the West Asia region, marked by the simultaneous decline of the Western dependency on West Asian oil. Now let's take up an article from page number 8. A joint committee that was constituted by the National Green Tribunal to study air pollution in the state of Kerala has submitted its recommendations. This joint committee comprised of senior officials from the Environment Ministry, the Central and the State Pollution Control Boards, and even scientific institutions such as CSIR and the others. This joint committee has recommended the installation of vapor recovery systems at fuel stations in order to capture the benzene emissions, because benzene is a volatile organic compound that gets released into the atmosphere through evaporation at the fuel stations. Then the committee has also recommended the retrofitting of particulate filters on diesel vehicles in order to capture particulate matter, especially PM 2.5, which is known to cause hazardous air pollution. So the joint committee set up by the NGT has recommended these measures to be implemented by the Central and the State Pollution Control Boards by working along with the Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization. Now let's take up the mains practice questions. The first question: evaluate the emerging dynamics in the Indo Pacific in the context of the first ever Quad Summit. The second question: Afghanistan has been presented with two bad options. It has to choose between war and sharing power with the Taliban. Critically discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.